I called the July 14th, 2015 study session of the Newport Beach City Council to order. May we have the roll call, please?
The record will reflect that all members of council are present.
Okay, first item under current business is clarification of items on the consent calendar. Councilmember Muldoon?
None.
Councilmember Duffy?
I have to recuse myself on number 22. I do business with them.
Okay, that'll be later. We'll
I
help you
always
when
do
you get
that.
there.
Sorry, I have none. Sorry.
Oh, we'll take care of it, don't worry. Councilmember Piotr? None. Councilmember Petros? None. Mayor Pro Tem Dixon?
None.
And I have none. So the main item of our study session today is Balboa Island seawalls, and we're going to have a staff presentation on this. The way I'd like to handle this today, if the council will indulge me on this, is to have the staff presentation and everyone hold their questions. It's kind of a detailed presentation. Write down your questions that you have, and then you can queue in on the queuing system, and when the presentation is over, we'll go through one by one and ask staff any questions that we have on it. And the other thing I'd like to do is when the staff gets done with their presentation, before you do your comments, I'd like to put out on the table my recommendations on how we handle the seawall situation. This is something I've been working on Balboa Island with since I got on to the city council. It started off with the Grand Canal, dredging, eelgrass. Now we're into seawalls, sea level rise, all of these issues, and they all really tie together. So I'd like to put a proposal out on the table for your consideration, as well as the folks in the audience. I see people out on Balboa Island. It's in my district on almost a daily basis. I get constant emails, questions, conversations with people. I get all the different opinions. I think I have a sense where the majority would like to go on this, and something that would work for the city. So I'd like to be able to present that at the conclusion of the staff presentation. So is that acceptable? Any objections to that? Okay. Seeing none, staff, let's roll.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and council members and all the folks in the audience. My name is Dave Webb, Public Works Director. Tonight we have Bob Stein. He's our Assistant City Engineer with us tonight. And before we start, I want to really kind of echo what Mr. Selich just mentioned, thanking the folks who were involved in this. This has been a long process. We've had a lot of discussions. Bob's probably given no more than 15 PowerPoints and presentations. The mayor sat through at least 4 years that I've been watching this on the Tidelands Committee. We had former council members Henn and Gardner who are on this, and now council members Ms. Dixon and Mr. Petros are sitting through this. We had several citizen advisory panel members in and out of this discussion. Don Lorenz, I see Jeff Herdman out in the audience, and Paul Blank, Jamshed Deshmir, various, John Crow is here. I've seen a lot of you. Thank you all for your participation and help on this presentation and where we're coming tonight, Lord. It's been a big conversation, a lot of information. I did want to kind of give you just a little background. There are some people that are new to the conversation. I'll be very brief on that. And then we have a very large PowerPoint, and it's on our website, and we encourage you all to look at that. We will hopefully at the mayor's blessing tonight be starting with slide 52 and moving through a portion of the PowerPoint, the meat of the PowerPoint. I'm going to skip over a lot of the history unless the council would like us to come into that and talk at any specific items. But to intro the item, we have about 18 miles of bulkheads and seawalls in our harbor. Of that, about 3 miles of that is public seawalls and bulkheads. And of that, 2 miles, or about 60% of our walls, are on Balboa Island. These walls on Balboa Island were built in the early 19th century. We've got from about 1925 to 1939, our walls were built. Some of the older ones on the Grand Canal in the West End are our oldest ones, and the rest right around 1939. Uniqueness, too, about the island and why these walls are really important. Balboa Island, if you're familiar with the island, is one of our lowest islands. We have several islands in the harbor, and the next lowest would be Collins Island, which is elevation 8. Balboa Island is about elevation 5 to 7. That's below the high tide line, so this seawall really protects this island from flooding. More so than any other island, if it had a failure, you wouldn't flood because the island itself is usually above the high tide. Wall conditions range, it varies along the island. Again, these walls are 76 to 86 years old, kind of past their design lifespan, but they're still holding together rather well. We are seeing obvious signs of distress, cracks, seismic risk is a big possibility in these. They didn't even design for seismic risk back in the 20s and 30s when these walls were built. Walls have different characteristics to them. Some of the concerns in the Grand Canal, we have shallow embedment. That's a wall that's made of soldier piles with concrete planks between the piles, and they're not really embedded real deep into the bedding. So a lot of unknown conditions and different degrees of repair. Back in 2011, we did an assessment of the walls. We had a consultant come in, URS Griner come in along with another one to look at that and give us kind of an idea of what the structural integrity of the walls is, along with another item we wanted to look at, overtopping. We were seeing signs of water overtopping the walls, waves break, and we brought in the new discussion of seawater rise into the conversation. And we have some information on that. We spent a lot of time in the Tidelands Committee talking about that. Got down to two primary issues with our walls that are of concern. The structural integrity of the walls, and we want to address that, and also what do we want to do about the overtopping concerns and maybe the seawater rise. So I'm going to start in, if it's okay with you, Mayor and Council, at slide 52, and kind of give you a little snapshot of where we were in the Tidelands Commission. Again, we mentioned we have all kinds of public hearings on this, robust discussions, presentations on this. Discussions included guidance. URS was our marine engineer consultant, and we actually have URS and Anchor staff tonight with us, and I'll introduce them in a minute to give us any professional advice that we need from that side. We had active participation between the island members and the Island Association. We actually had one meeting out at the Beak Center, a lot of discussion back and forth, got to get some hands-on on what the walls needed. So the Tidelands Committee looked at this, and through all this, discussion, recommendations, directions, we tried different options, looked at different things, had the consultant look at various possibilities on that. And we really considered, starting with really broad, should we replace all the walls on the island? That was the original thought when the study came out in 2011. That was a very expensive thought. Not sure if we needed that, but we did look at that, and we're kind of moving away from that at this point. We think we have some other better options. We looked at one option, for instance, we considered a tide gate. What would it happen if we built like a tide gate like you see in Europe and some of those to protect the harbor from the flooding itself? It's something we looked at, and maybe in the future it might fit our harbor. Right now we still have to deal with the structural integrity of the walls. Some other issues came into play, so we kind of ruled that that's probably not a good option right now. And we started focusing in on various strategies of maybe between rehab and replacement, some capping, what might be the best approach in that. We're going to talk in detail about those in a little bit. The guiding principles that we kind of got out of the Tidelands Committee basically were to maximize the useful life and benefit out of our existing walls. We have infrastructure out there. We've paid for that infrastructure. We want to make sure we get the most life out of that. We also wanted to minimize the cost up front on the structural rehabilitation, cap the walls where we could, and where it makes sense to cap too. We want to make sure we protect the island, but we don't want to raise that cap unnecessarily too high at this point because there's a lot of discussion about how much flooding we might have in the future, which brought into the idea of the seawall debate. And we had a lot of discussion on that. We had folks believing in seawater rise, some not believing, not sure where to go. We have a lot of professional studies recognized by the state and the feds on what we might predict and see in the future. So the committee said, well, let's address that in the best way possible in a phased approach. Let's do what we need to do now to raise the cap, to address what we know and maybe give us some cushion, and then we'll readjust in the future as things come along. And if we see a lot of rise, we can cap again. If it's rising slower than predicted, we could slow down that process. And again, design that walls, any walls we do, particularly new walls, to accommodate future capping. So we'd make sure they're structurally compliant so we could put a cap on top. So with that, I'm going to move down to let Mr. Stein talk about the two primary issues here, again, the stability and the overtopping.
Thank you, Dave. As Dave said, we've been working on this since 2011, and the breadth of topics that we've discussed have been very interesting. We had a lot of great feedback from the committee. But the two central issues are how do we maintain the structural integrity of the seawalls? And the two options we'll look at today are new seawalls or seawall rehabilitation. And the second issue is how do we address the current overtopping and the concerns for future sea level rise? And that gets us to what is an appropriate top of wall elevation that we should be implementing in the very near future. And so for issue 1, maintaining the structural integrity of the new seawalls, the advantages of the new seawalls are they will be structurally sound and they will be protective against seismic failure. Because they're new walls, the maintenance will also be minimal. And as you'll see in the presentation, we do not require easements for this type of installation. Seawall rehabilitation, on the other hand, we're trying to get the most mileage out of the walls, and so there's a reduction in the initial cost. And let me just refer you here to the photo here. This is installation that was done similar to on Bay Island, and as opposed to in the past where you would drive piles with a diesel hammer, the new methodology doesn't even vibrate the piles, and it actually pushes them directly into the sand. So I was actually there during the installation, and I won't say that there's no vibrations, but it's minimal. So it's an advance in the construction methodology, and it's something that would be appropriate for minimizing disturbance for our residents. The second issue is, what do we do about overtopping of the seawalls? And you can see from this photo here, taken in 2010, that our crews were called out when we had storm swells overtopping the seawalls, and they bring out portable pumps, and they bail the water and put it back into the bay. But at some point, that if we have a large storm, we haven't had a large storm since 1997, or if we start seeing the sea level rise manifest itself, at some point, the overtopping will overwhelm our ability of our crews to actually bail it out. So at that point, you have the concern that you're going to have flooding of cars that are parked in the streets, and homeowners that have some of the lower-lying houses will have to sandbag. So let's address issue number 2, which is how do we handle the overtopping in the near future? So if you see in red here, and I made some adjustments in this PowerPoint, I think it's maybe a little bit different than the hard copies you have. The current elevations are shown in red. The lowest areas are on the north side of Balboa Island, about 7.8 feet. About 8.25 feet on the south side of Balboa Island. Grand Canal is between 8.5 and 8.7 feet. Little Island ranges from 8.7 to 9 feet and a little bit more. So what we're proposing for protection through 2025 would be to leave the elevations alone on Grand Canal and Little Island, and then adjust the elevations on the north and south sides of the island about 9 inches. And so where do the 9 inches come from? If you look at the photo, you can see that the crest of the wave there above the top of walls, maybe 3-4 inches higher. And if we do experience some sea level rise over the next 10 years, say 3 years, which is kind of a conservative outlier, then we have a 7-inch sea level rise. So if we're raising our walls 9 inches on the south side, we're going to have protection through the next decade. So why are we showing a lower elevation on the north side of Balboa Island? Well, the rationale is that we don't get the storm surges coming through the jetty on the north side. That's sheltered. And so we feel comfortable that we can, at least for the next decade, tolerate a lower elevation, 8.5 feet, even though that is lower than the city's current standard. So now let's turn to issue 1. How do we handle the structural integrity of the seawalls? We're going to look at 4 options here. We looked at many more options during the last 4 years, but this tends to cover the entire spectrum that we looked at and includes, I think, the best suggestions for rehabilitation. So just a quick summary here. The first one is basically the all-new seawall option, the exception being on the north side of Balboa Island. That's the one that's sandwiched in by sand, and it seems to be in the best condition. So we're thinking perhaps for that side we can go ahead and continue to raise the cap as needed. And the construction cost, initial construction cost, $68 million. We're terming that the long-term solution. Under option B, we would only rebuild the most vulnerable seawalls on the Grand Canal and the West End, about 4,400 feet, and then we would cap the north and south sides of Balboa Island, $35 million. We're calling that the best value, and when we get to the later slides, you'll see why we've termed that best value. And then options C and D are very similar. Basically, for C, we're limiting our new seawall construction only to the west end south of Collins Island, 640 feet, with a retrofit proposed on the Grand Canal and the west end north of Collins Island. $17 million, a short-term solution. And then option D is basically no new seawalls, just retrofit on the west end and the Grand Canal, $14 million. So let's talk about each of these options. Option A in some ways is the easiest option, where we would build new seawalls outside the existing seawalls, 18 inches to 24 inches offset. They would be designed to, they would be cantilevered walls. That is, there's no tieback, and I'll show you an exhibit on what that means in a minute. And they would be installed top elevation with the cap 8.5 feet or 9 feet, but they would be designed so if we needed to, we could actually put a cap extension up to 14 feet. Estimated cost for the new seawalls plus capping the north side, $54 million. That includes new seawalls, a new cap. It includes new boardwalks adjacent to the new seawalls. It includes taking steps to make sure we have access to the private and public piers. It also includes modifications at the entrance of the ferry and Collins Island, so we would actually berm up the road, so we'd have a barrier there for flood protection, and some ADA modifications to the boardwalk near Mariner's Bridge. The costs are in large part based on bids that we saw for the Naples seawall construction, which their first phase just completed. And so with contingency, which we estimated at 25%, because we're still at concept level, the total would be $68 million for option A. And that would be assuming we have construction, say, by 2020. Item 3 here in the notes, if we do see that we have sea level rise, as predicted by some, then we showing a $3 million cost for raising all the seawalls on both islands 6 inches at a cost of $3 million. And then finally, item 4, in the year 2040, assuming that the north side of Balboa Island is performing well, that wall will now be in excess of 110 years old, and so would be ready to be replaced by a new seawall. $17 million, that includes a 25% contingency. Okay, option B, the pink shows where we would propose building the new seawalls on the Grand Canal and the west end. And then we would have caps on the north and south sides of the island, Big Island. So here's the summary of that on new seawalls along the entire length of the west end, 1,170 feet. South side of Collins Island, 9 feet. North side, 8.5 feet. New seawalls on both sides of the Grand Canal and we would maintain the existing elevation about 8.5 feet. Then we would raise the seawall cap on the south side of Balboa Island to elevation 9 and raise the seawall cap on the north side of Balboa Island to elevation 8.5. This is an example of what the cap extension would look like on the north and south sides of the Balboa Island. This is actually a cap extension constructed on the Little Island back in the 90s. And basically you can see that the existing seawall is in good condition. So what we did is we doweled into the existing wall, put an epoxy layer, then formed and poured this 12-inch extension. I should note that some areas around both islands, the existing seawall is in not such good condition. So in that case, we would be removing the old cap and then rebuilding it up to the proper top of seawall elevation. One other thing to note here is that you can see in the background there that the pier, private pier, is lower than the top cap. So in this situation, the owner has to climb over the cap extension and then down onto his pier. It's expected that for any seawall rehabilitation or new seawalls, that the owners will be responsible for their own piers. They can raise their piers or put in stairs. But we, the city, would be responsible for the land side improvement. So we would take steps in our design to try to provide steps within the cap so that the access would be reasonable. Cost for option B, $28 million plus a $7 million contingency, $35 million. Again, in 2025, looking at additional $3 million to raise the cap on both islands, 6 inches plus. And then in 2040, the 8,740 feet of walls that were capped on the north and south sides of Balboa Island, as well as Little Island, the south and east sides, would need to be replaced at a cost of $52 million. Option C is the most complicated and most interesting of the options because it includes a short length of improvements on the west end for new walls, that's shown in pink. The orange is the rehabilitated walls in the Grand Canal and on the west end north of Collins Island. And then, as similar to option B, you'd have capping on the north and south sides of the Big Island. So let's take a look at the as-built condition. This is for the Grand Canal. And so if we're looking to rehabilitate the wall, we really need to understand the existing condition, or actually the as-built condition. So this construction, which took place in 1929, first they installed these soldier piles or columns, spaced at 11 feet, and they're concrete, reinforced concrete, and in between the soldier piles are these horizontal concrete planks that are piled up. So we have 3 planks, 3 foot in depth, and they extend down just below the mud line. Now, unfortunately, the soldier piles were not deeply embedded. And so there is the concern that there could be a blowout from the bottom. There's also this other concern here that we have this tie rod that connects from the soldier pile to what we call a timber deadman or a telephone pole. In our past maintenance of the sidewalk, we've discovered that that tie rod is either severely corroded or gone. So now you no longer have the restraint at the top of the wall as designed. So the rehabilitation method we're going to show you assumes that we'll be able to put some kind of anchoring system to stabilize the top of the wall. Before I show you that exhibit, I also wanted to note again that the shallow embedment of the soldier piles, if you lost the mud that was on the ocean side due to a storm or something, you have the potential of a blowout, which is actually something we saw here at the Newport Marina Villas back in 1995. Again, those piles were shallow embedded and they actually they failed. So this is a real concern for the Grand Canal. We have another interesting situation on the Grand Canal. This picture was taken by a resident just last week. It shows this spalled veneer. Back in the early 80s, we're not exactly sure why, but the city installed this 4-inch shotcrete veneer with reinforcing on the walls, on the soldier piles, and on the cap. And we believe it was to prohibit either water flowing through the wall onto the land side or from sand coming out into the Grand Canal. So we now have this kind of widespread spalling of this material. Now, that in itself doesn't forestall a rehabilitation method for this Grand Canal, but it does perhaps complicate it a little bit. And we can talk about that more. So here's kind of a summary of the structural constraints or problems that we have to deal with the seawall rehabilitation. The walls are aging 80 to 86 years. Original lifespan is approximately 75 years. On the Grand Canal, we see the wall veneer is failing, very shallow embedment of the soldier piles and concrete planks, and I've shown in green additional wording that may not be on your hard copies. And then we also have the corroded tie rods. The west end, the residents know about the floating sidewalks, and we have a high tide, we have water coming out of the sidewalks. There's superficial signs of distress on the wall. The red arrow there is pointing to a longitudinal crack on the soldier pile. And again, we have corroded tie rods, and then back in 1985, at the bottom of the seawall, ballast was placed in order to stabilize the mud line and keep it from eroding. So this is the solution that seemed to be the most appropriate for rehabilitating the Grand Canal and the West End. And it's an earth anchor and tube whaler system. This is a schematic here that may be a little difficult to understand. I do have a picture that I could show if you're interested. But basically what would be involved is we would take 25 length of rectangular tube, and we would place it against 3 of the soldier piles, and then use anchors to affix the whale against the soldier piles and drive it under the ground 20, 30, 40 feet. We would not drive the anchors through the soldier piles. We'd actually drive them on the walls adjacent to the soldier pile. And the reason for that is the soldier piles are reinforced, and we're afraid that if we put a 4-inch hole into that, we're going to disrupt the rebar and then weaken the soldier pile, which is an essential element of the structural integrity of the wall. So here's another exhibit that shows that the anchors would be going under people's homes, and so we would require easements from every homeowner on the Grand Canal and affected owners on the West End. This diagram shows the anchor coming at a 15 degrees and extending 35 to 45 feet distance from the face of the wall. The way this construction methodology works is that these rods are hollow, and so they are actually hydraulically pressed into the soil, but while you're doing that, you're injecting a grout which tends to jet in front of the rod, facilitating movement of the rod through the soil, and it also fills the voids that may be, occur as you're drilling and putting the rod into the surface. I've seen other, of course, we have not done the design on these rods. I've seen indications you can go as deep as 30-degree angle underneath a home. It's possible also to shorten the anchors. But you can see that any resident or property owner is going to be concerned about this kind of installation. They're going to say, what about my foundation, my plumbing? Are we going to see settlement? Are there going to be cracks in my house? These are all legitimate questions. This type of installation is, because it's hydraulically driven, is going to be relatively vibration free, but you can certainly understand the concern that some residents may have. I've also like to point out that in the chart below that I've been in a couple projects where we had to get many easements, and for instance, the Morning Canyon Erosion Control Project, that was a project that actually had a massive slope failure, and many homes were at risk for seeing some of their property actually involved in failures. And even though I was on friendly terms with the property owners, it still took 9 months to get those easements. On Buck Gully, we needed 23 easements. At some point, it became hopeless, and I called on the city manager and the council member and public works directors to help me out, and they struck out, and we kind of recouped and redesigned, and we came up with a design that finally worked, and took us 18 months to get those easements. Balboa Island Seawall project, 93 easements, and I didn't put a duration to obtain those easements. It's going to be difficult. The first 50 or 70% will go easy, but then people are going to have the concerns I mentioned. Plus, one that might resonate here is a lot of people don't like easements because they consider it an encumbrance on the property, and degrades the value of their home. So this is an unknown that probably needs to be thought about, because when we're applying for our permits, if we're going to be proposing this methodology, we almost want to have those permits in hand before we start into the construction documents and permit applications. And if we have to wait to capture those easements, then that may delay the design of the project.
Bob, if I can interrupt just a minute, just so it's clear. There were a couple options he talked about, and when we talk about a new wall and a new sheet pile wall, we're talking about a cantilevered system. That's where the wall's embedded deeper and completely supports itself and does not need a tie rod. So when you put a new wall in, we would not be looking for easements. Granted, you have vibration, other things. And there are a couple examples. This is one that Bob showed. There are other ways to do this, chase anchors and everything, but you're still probably going to have to encroach into private property at some level. You have to have enough mass behind that anchor it's grabbing onto the soil, and that's what it's using to resist the wall from overturning. So it's just an important note here. If we go into rehab, which is fine if that's where council wants to go, there is some work with the residents. We're going to look for some cooperation on that. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, thank you. And further note on that, the anchoring system, I understand, we could expect a maximum of 20 years lifetime with this type of rehabilitation. So here's a summary of the proposed improvements under option C. New seawalls on the west end south of Collins Island, 500 feet of seawall anchor whaler rehabilitation on the west end north of the Collins Island Bridge, easements required. Raise the cap on the south side from 8.3 to 9 feet, and raise the cap on the north side of Balboa Island to 8.5 feet. Grand Canal, seawall and anchor rehabilitation on both sides of the Grand Canal, easements required. No change in the top of wall elevation. And then maintenance requirements. First, we'd have an inspection of the walls to see if this rehabilitation would be appropriate. And then after the installation, there'd be annual inspections to make sure the system is working as designed. Again, 10 to 20 year expected useful lifetime of the whaler anchor system. And then annual maintenance, annual inspections, repair as needed. And then also for the Grand Canal, annual sand buttressing to maintain or improve the mudline elevation. And here's a picture from 1999 where you can see them dredging in the canal and placing the sand against the seawalls. And this exhibit is just showing that this dredged material, it's going to want to settle back to its natural repose. And if we have a storm, that sand will disappear more quickly. So we're guessing that the annual dredging would be the minimum dredging. We may actually be looking at maybe every 6 months. If we're looking at that much dredging, probably the resource agencies, especially the Coastal Conservancy, will be having some issues potentially. Cost summary, $8.2 million for the improvements, 640 feet of seawall, plus the rehabilitation, plus the capping. 20-year enhanced maintenance, $5 million. 25% contingency takes us up to $16.5 million. And then if you look at note 2, if we need to extend the cap, $6.5 million. This is a higher cost than we saw for options A and B because you're going to have more cap that may have to be removed and then rebuilt appropriately. And then at the end of the useful lifetime of the anchoring system, sometime between 2030 and 2040, $75 million to replace all the rehabbed and capped walls. Some final notes. This rehabilitation method is not protective per current seismic standards. The shallow embedment of the walls in the Grand Canal put them at high risk of blowout from seismically induced liquefaction, and I have not added a line item in the estimate for emergency mobilization and repair. The installation of the anchors can damage existing walls. No line item has been added for localized repair or replacement. And over the next 25 years, future settling, cracking, plumbing, leaks, etc. of houses could be claimed to be attributable to the seawall rehabilitation, and I have not put any contingency within the estimate for potential claims. And then finally, option D, the orange shows the rehabilitation on the west end and the Grand Canal with the capping similar to options B and C, actually it's the same. And the cost, $13.6 million for improvements, maintenance, and contingency. Line item 3 shows $7.5 million for the 6-inch cap extension in 2025, and then $79 million or more when you have to come back and replace all the seawalls. So this is a summary of the immediate costs. Option A, $68 million, expected useful lifetime 100 years. Option B, $35 million, 100-year life expectancy for the new seawalls, 25 years we're hoping to get out of the capped seawalls on the north and south sides. Option C, $17 million. The useful lifetime is based on what we hope to get from the anchoring system, up to 20 years, which is the same thing for option D, $14 million. We're going to have a comparison of total costs in just a minute here. I just wanted to do a quick comparison of options B and C. B is the new seawalls and capping, $35 million, versus option C, which is the basically rehabilitation and capping, $16.5 million. Easements required, yes, for option C. Could delay construction initiation because you may want to wait till you have the easements in hand. Cap extension costs, $3 million versus $6.5 million. Replacing the seawall caps in 2040, 52 versus $75 million. Total present worth $90 million versus $98 million. If the rehabilitation works on the Grand Canal and West End, we can feel good that we obtained the maximum mileage we can get from these seawalls. If the rehabilitation does not work, then our investment in the anchoring system is compromised. We may have emergency repair costs, and we could get property damage claims. Risk of seismic failure would be low under option B and high under option C. And then qualitatively, overall risk for structural failure, option B is low, 1 to 2. Option C, moderate to high, 5 to 10. So this is my last slide before I turn it over to Dan. I've broken the schedule into two parts, one for the capping, which can proceed for any of the options, and I would recommend we proceed with that now. With design, that's not clear if we need permits, but I expect we will need permits. We could start the design September, complete within a year, and start the construction in 2017. The estimated cost for option B would be $1 million for the capping on the north and south side of Balboa Island, same for option C. Then for the new seawall replacement or the seawall rehabilitation, for option B, I'm showing if we started design now, we could have permits in hand by 2018, starting construction in 2018 and completing by 2020. For option C, I'm showing 15 months to get the easements from the 93 property owners, then starting design in 2017, permits in hand by 2020, starting construction in 2020 and completing by 2021. And now it gets interesting.
And Dan, just before you go, and just to clarify too, we didn't show option D on here, but recall option D is a complete rehab, so there's no new wall segment at the west end. And just to clarify that, Bob, if we do rehab on the west end, we'll also probably need some additional easements because we weren't factoring in putting tie rods at that end, but it could be done. So just to note on that, and there's a small cost differential. I'll let Dan go into that, excuse me.
Thank you, Dave. Anytime we look at construction projects that span a long period of time, it's important to consider the time value of money. So all these initial cost estimates were stated in today's costs. And so as you know, the very first thing we do is look at the future costs of the projects, and we'll look at construction indexes. And so, you know, we grew the cost to what we would expect it to be 10 and 25 years from now. And then we also considered what we might earn on the proceeds or any of our savings if we didn't make that outlay for a period of time. And that is, so we have a growth factor, and then we have a discount factor. In this particular case, we were estimating that the growth factor was going to be very close to our interest earnings. The long and the short of it, after we looked at all these gyrations, the cost was very close. The present value cost was very close to the present value cost. And so if you look at the bottom line, you can see clearly option B is the lowest cost, even after we consider growth and lost interest earnings. And option A is the second cheapest option. Cost isn't the only factor. Dave and Bob mentioned certain risk factors that may occur during that period of time. And the city and residents may be exposed to some additional risk by not attending to some of the construction or by delaying it for some period of time. That should be considered as well. Next slide. So when we look at the funding history, there was a Tidelands master plan that prioritized several projects. And while they were prioritized, they weren't attached to a specific a funding plan. Mostly it was on a pay-as-you-go basis, with the exception of the Tidelands capital plan, or the harbor capital plan, that identified certain revenue sources from the increase in residential docks, commercial marinas, and those revenue sources were sequestered and put in a harbor capital fund that was intended to fund future amenities and Tidelands maintenance, including both amenities and dredging. Shortly after that, we said, okay, well, we have an opportunity to do a lot of harbor dredging now, so the general fund loaned the harbor capital fund $15.8 million, both for dredging and the construction of the Marina Park Marina. Subsequent to that loan, we reversed course and the dock and mooring rents were reduced, leaving the harbor capital fund as a source of revenue to be somewhat anemic. So after we consider repaying the general fund debt back, there's a little left to fund future amenities, or much less of this project. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, that the capital of the advance was made up of both a dredging component of $9.7 million, as well as the Marina Park Marina of $6.1 million. And we were considering a very slow payback so that the revenues generated in the harbor fund could still, wouldn't suck up all of the revenue earnings, and it would allow us to do amenities. However, after making the annual payments to the general fund, the harbor capital fund is only expected to net about $500K annually. So that's barely enough to do the amenities that we want to do now, much less really have any significant impact on paying for the seawall. So when we consider future options, of course, the least popular is a special benefit assessment. While not popular, there is a direct and special benefit to the residents. And there's a good argument that the Balboa Island residents should pay all, or at least a portion of this improvement. Otherwise, other neighborhoods would, in effect, subsidize the cost of this particular improvement. So that's one option, and I realize that is not very palatable, but an option nonetheless. The other idea I had to perhaps make things less painful on the residents but capture some money that's left on the table, we know Marine Avenue is a heavily parked commercial area, and if we were to convert Marine Avenue and Park Avenue to paid parking, you could generate about $700,000 in addition a year. So there's a second option. We could use the little available proceeds in the Harbor Capital Fund, but that may squeeze out some of the harbor amenities that are currently planned. And I'm going to ask Dave Webb to speak to some of those amenity projects that may be at risk if we decide to look at the remaining funds in the Harbor Capital Fund.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Bob. Yeah, we do have a harbor capital plan, and we have several projects in there, particularly new dock construction, rehabbing docks. We have additional dredging and other items in there that we've approved that plan. And if we do choose to go this route, we may have to readjust that. We have to look at the financial ramifications of that. And you've seen that harbor master plan. We brought it through the CIP budget presentation. So just to let you know that, that would be something we would surely want to consider. I think at this point, now that we've kind of shown you the options and the funding, I'd like to just kind of wrap that up. We've given you 4 options to kind of consider tonight. We're looking for your guidance. Option A, again, is the biggest option. Staff thinks that's probably the most expensive. It's probably not our most preferred due to the cost. We're more in the B, C, and D range. B is probably the best value for you. It gives you some safeguards. It limits your liability compared to some of the others. As you go down to C and D, you take a little more risk because there's unknowns with these walls. Not that they can't happen, but you're looking at more short term. We're going to be talking about rehab and maybe repair. And again, maybe that's the best option, but there is a little more unknowns because there's so much of these walls that we don't know about, particularly in the Grand Canal and the West End. We see problems that are showing over the last 20, 30 years when we've been doing other maintenance projects. So kind of given that, we'd like to probably turn this back to you, Mr. Mayor, and the council, and see where you'd like to go. And we're here for questions or to discuss any other slides we didn't show tonight.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Before I get into my comments, I'd just like to, express my gratitude to the staff for all the work that they've done on this over the last 4 years that they've been involved in the Seawall issue. As you can see from, if you've watched the full PowerPoint that's done, they've done a tremendous amount of work. Bob Stein, I call him Dr. Stein, is not Dr. Frankenstein, but Dr. Stein. Really is an expert on this subject. He has a tremendous amount of knowledge, and whenever I have a question, I have confidence that when I talk to Bob that I'm going to get good, solid information, and in those instances where he doesn't know the answer off the top of his head, he's certainly able to get it back to me quickly. So Bob, I really want to thank you for all you've done over the last few years, because you've done a tremendous job on this, all the presentations and all the work that you've done on it. It's just been great. As I said, I've been involved in this from virtually the day I got on the council, because I got involved in the Grand Canal on dredging, eelgrass, and the Park Avenue Bridge. Those were just 3 things that faced me right away as I got onto the city council. That was in 2005. And over the years, it's morphed into the situation with the seawalls. And as I said, I've talked to many people on the island to gauge their opinions on things that they want to do. I've studied and done a lot of my own research on all of the information the staff has developed on all the techniques and what's going on with sea level rise. And I'm familiar with what the city's budgetary situation is and how our financial situation looks going into the future. We have a good program of projecting out. We have a facilities financing plan that looks many years into the future on taking care of all of our major city facilities. We've got good master plans for water and sewer, so we do have good long-range planning for maintaining our infrastructure. So with that as kind of a background, what I'm going to propose is I'll call it a modified C and D alternative. It's somewhere in between the 2 alternatives. There's 10 points I'm going to make here. The first one is that I think the staff has done a good job at coming up with recommendations on the seawall heights. This has been something that's been controversial from the day it first started coming out. When it first came out, my wife and I walked around the island and took a measuring stick and took pictures of where some of these seawall heights were projected to be, and I sat on a lot of your patios. Some of you were there, some of you weren't, but I sat on them anyway. And I was able to, experience what you would experience from your homes. And given all of that, I think that the staff's recommendations for the foreseeable future are reasonable recommendations on seawall heights, and I think they should give us good protection over that period of time. They won't cause any adverse impacts or impairments to people's views or adverse impacts to their properties over that period of time, and it seems to be a common sense way to go. So that deals with the issue of height, and then we get to the issue of, well, do we build new or do we repair? And that's what I call it, maintenance and repair, because that's what I'm looking at doing. So let's start with the Grand Canal. As I said, that's been a big issue ever since I got on the city council. And so what I'm proposing that we do is that we stabilize the Grand Canal walls by dredging sand from the canal, maintain that mud line up against the seawall, and then on an as-needed basis, and no less than an annual basis, that we do dredging to maintain that mud line to keep those seawalls stabilized. That solves a number of problems. It deals with eelgrass. We'll be able to maintain the eelgrass once it's removed. That's an area that just by its nature has a tendency to grow. The more frequent dredging will help control the growth of the eelgrass. The frequent dredging will help maintain the mud lines so that the material doesn't slough off. And it gives us a situation similar to the North Bay front, where we have a seawall that goes down fairly deep, but the mud line in the North Bay front virtually goes up to the cap area. If we can do this, no easements would be required. We're not going to have to do tiebacks. If we have to do some tiebacks in some areas, we can take a look at finding a way to do the tiebacks and tie into the existing dead men and stay within the existing right-of-way and not go under people's property. I don't think we've investigated that alternative enough, and we need to do so. My discussions with staff have indicated, well, that's a more expensive alternative because it would be require more tight work, if you will, to get in behind the seawall and deal with those tiebacks. But given the adverse impacts to people that are going to be living there for the next 20 years, that may be the best way to go if just doing a pure increase in the height of the mud line by piling the sand up against the wall doesn't work on its own. And in that scenario, we would also repair any of the spalling that occurs as appropriate. Then on point number 3, we would raise the Grand Canal seawall on an incremental basis as part of a repair and maintenance program to the recommended heights that the staff has as needed. Point number 4 is we would stabilize the west end wall, again on a repair and maintenance basis where feasible. Point number 5 is as soon as possible that we conduct an in-depth survey of the 640 section, that's the section that the staff feels is most at risk, of the west end, and that's generally from Park Avenue wrapping around almost to Garnet, to determine if repair is feasible there. If the repair is feasible, we can move ahead with the stabilization on a repair and maintenance basis for that area of the wall. That's point number 6. Point number 7 is if the repair is infeasible, then we design a new wall for that 640-foot section, be prepared to construct it on an emergency basis, and file the appropriate applications to construct it. But we would have it designed and be prepared to do it on an emergency basis while we were waiting for the application approval, if necessary. Then point number 8 is that we would raise the north and south bay front walls on an incremental basis, again as part of a repair and maintenance program, and concentrating initially on those areas that we know are experiencing overtopping under current high tide conditions. The pictures that you saw of the seawall overtopping are not consistent in all in the tide conditions that we have, and so we know where the most vulnerable areas are, and we could start in those areas and work our way around on an incremental basis. Again, looking at it as a repair and maintenance project. That's point number 8. Then the funding. I stated August, almost a year ago, at the Tidelands Management Committee meeting that after considering all of this, that I did not think it was appropriate that there be an assessment district for the folks on Balboa Island to pay for these seawalls. These are public seawalls. They're like our streets. We have a public walkway, heavily used public walkway, arguably the most used, certainly at least tied with the bayfront or the oceanfront walkway on the peninsula, where people from all over the city and quite frankly all over the world come and use that. So it is definitely a citywide facility. It's of citywide benefit and not just a benefit to the property owners on Balboa Island. And so to look at the funding, I would propose that we had the whole menu of other options up there. I don't see many of them providing a significant amount of money to deal with the problem. So I would like the staff to bring back to us some recommendations on how to fund this without unduly impacting other priority capital improvement projects in the city. And basically it means Tidelands funds, general fund, and perhaps dipping in on a loan basis into our reserves. But there needs to be a balance there. And if we take this approach, it's at the lower end of the cost scale. So it seems to be a way that we could thoughtfully do this and do it in a way that we're not going to put other important projects in the city at risk, and come up with a funding source. Because if you just say we're going to take it out of the Tidelands and General Fund, we're going to be dipping into other projects potentially, or we're not going to be able to build it. So we need to come up with some kind of a common sense approach here on how to deal with this. And then the last, and I think in many ways the most significant point, is that this is not the permanent solution. At some point these walls need to be rebuilt. And the question is today the day that we make that decision, or does it come at some point later in time? And one of the things that we need to do, it's required by the Coastal Commission, and increasingly other state agencies. State Lands Commission is involved in this now, and I expect it to get more prevalent. It's that we develop a sea level rise plan for the city on how we handle sea level rise. We've seen the idea of the tide gate. The question is, when do we have to make the decision on whether we need to do a tide gate or not, if that's where we want to go? Is it a number of years in the future? Is it a certain number of feet or inches that the sea level rises? How are we going to deal with that? Sea level rise affects more than Balboa Island. We don't know what's going to happen with sea level rise. As the staff said, there's different schools of thought out there as to whether it's man-made or not. It's definitely rising. Is it going to continue? Is it going to rise at the levels projected by the different analysts? I don't think we know. I've been around long enough that I remember in the 1970s, I think, the Time magazine had a cover that the Earth was going to freeze over because of greenhouse gases. I remember the picture of the Earth all frozen from that magazine cover. Lately, it's all been global warming, and just yesterday, I think, some scientific institute in Great Britain came out with the projection that because of solar cycles that we're going to enter into a mini ice age in 2030, similar to what happened in the 1600s. Who knows? We don't know that right now, but we need to develop a plan on how we're going to deal with that. So it seems to me that, we need to deal with that so that we can deal with our harbor and our beaches in its entirety and do it in a thoughtful way. Just looking at the comparisons of the total cost of the different alternatives, today was the first time I saw the final slide on the time value of money. And I was really surprised at how little difference there is. $6 million between the most expensive alternative and the cheapest alternative. When you consider the impact that going to a full rebuild of seawalls with going to higher heights, the impacts on property values, the impacts on people's lives during construction, and all of that. That doesn't seem like a lot of money to take into consideration in funding a project like this. So those are my recommendations. I throw them out for council's consideration. I throw them out for your consideration as you make your comments. There's going to be more discussion on this. There's a meeting on Balboa Island coming up on the 25th, I think, at the fire station that will be discussed. I hope that these thoughts get out to more people and we get more conversation on that at that meeting. And then also Speak Up Newport's going to be doing a program not only on seawalls, but on sea level rise general in the city in August. That's the second Wednesday in August. So there's a lot happening there. So these are my thoughts, and I'll just throw it open to comments from others. And Councilmember Duffy, you want to start off?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too want to thank staff for all their hard work, and you, Mayor Selich, for all the years you've put into this thing. Obviously, I have not spent years doing it. However, the discussion and the Harbor Commission was given to us as I was in my 10 years with them. The detail is much greater here. However, so I want to emphasize the timing of this. When I look at the seawall and I see the high tides, especially this week, it's clear that there is a great need to get on this. And permitting processes do take a lot of time, and I believe we're out of time. We've got possibly an El Nino. We all hope there's an El Nino. So we'd love to have a lot of rain. When you get a rain event and a storm event at the same time, we're going to have some problems. And what the mayor's suggesting, and I want to say to you that I agree with your modified alternative D. I like it a lot. And I want to just say that the timing is everything, and we've got to get moving on this thing. I don't think we have time to wait around. I would like one suggestion to Mr. Stein, Bob over there, that I was going to ask why the idea of a soldier pile in lieu of a tieback wasn't considered on the west end as well as the Grand Canal to eliminate the need for an easement. And then a whaler. So my idea, it would be a soldier pile and then a whaler attaching it to do the same effect as a tieback.
So I'm sorry, with the soldier pile, you're talking about replacing the existing soldier piles or at the property line?
Add a soldier pile to the outside, to the exterior, and then connect a whaler, a metal channel to it in lieu of a tieback that I would agree is quite time consuming. And again, this is all in the hope we can get doing this quicker.
So I think that actually was an option that Jem suggested a year ago, with driving an H pile in front of the existing soldier pile. So you would be driving this pile, and perhaps that is a fairly big disruption, because you'd have one every 11 feet, and it'd be a percussion-driven, pile.
Well, you could I'm sorry, I don't mean to be a smart aleck,
Yes.
but wouldn't you hydraulically install that versus pounding on it? Anyway, I want to just, because of time here, I just want to say that I agree with the mayor's suggestions. Thank you.
Okay, no other comments at this time, so I'll open it up for public comment. So anyone wishing to comment, please come forward. State your name, please.
Good afternoon, I'm Paul Meyer, and I wanted to join in complimenting the staff on really being open to a lot of suggestions.
You get a little closer to the microphone there. There you go.
Of course.
Thank you.
It's Paul Meyer, and I wanted to compliment the staff as the mayor has done, but I also wanted to compliment the council. This has taken a tremendous amount of study. Nobody is looking at this lightly, and the mayor's in-depth work in this is really appreciated. In reviewing the proposals from the beginning, As you know, there's an independent study that's been provided, and everybody has taken a look at that, including the staff and the council. And I would just like to state that on behalf of the interested people, residents of Balboa Island, we greatly appreciate the consideration that property values are very important, because the fiscal strength of the city depends on that. In the beginning, before there was insight from some of the leading real estate experts and realtors in the Newport Beach, there was a question about whether the impact on people on the bayfront versus interior homes and all of that was really the same, and whether there were considerations. There were some splits of opinion among residents, but once all of the information came in, and it became quite evident that comparable sales values are what drive the sales prices on Balboa Island, any diminution in value to bayfront homes for any reason, whether it's view or other changes, has a reduction in value of all homes there. And energizing residents on Balboa Island is simple. Just reduce the value of their homes and you'll get their attention. And I think that's pretty self-evident. The decision made by council in taking into consideration the incremental process of doing the flood protection you need to do, but at the lowest possible incremental level, as the mayor has indicated and others have indicated, with an eye to the future, but not trying to second guess the future or jump ahead. And it can be done, and that kind of preparation can be done, and I think the mayor's suggestions are very strong. One question that had been raised just by members of areas on the North Bayfront was whether the North Bayfront had to end at the location where it's shown on the diagrams, or whether it should extend to the true north end rather than have the west wall by some engineering mark just extended around to the north side. We know everybody's taking that into consideration, and the 8.5 level that's been indicated through the whole north side all the way to the Collins Island Bridge is much appreciated by people that live there. As the mayor has said, if you come out and take a walk and sit in somebody's front yard or sit on the benches available, the effect of what you are deciding becomes readily apparent. So a great amount of appreciation. The motto of the residents of Balboa Island has been, the motto of the residents of Balboa Island has always been that Balboa Island is a community and not an engineering project, and I think that really has come around, and we just want to express appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Council. I'm Mark Tabbert. I'm a resident of Newport Beach. And I want to first of all say thank you for your service, and I want to say thank you for this session today. And I'm going to follow up on what the mayor said, and I'm going to give a copy of my comments and hope the council will consider them. I represent a group called Citizens Climate Lobby, and we're asking the council to do a community-wide ongoing discussion of climate change. It is as this shows, it's that important an issue. 97% of climate scientists are convinced, based on the evidence, that human-caused global warming is happening, and the evidence that and the results are widely understood to be problematic if we continue to do what we're doing and don't make any changes. What can and should the city of Newport Beach do about this global issue? This discussion of higher seawalls and rising tides is an opportune time to begin a thorough accounting, mitigation, and adaptation to changing climate are issues every city should consider. We are asking the city to air this issue and expose citizens to the science and solution options through outreach events like neighborhood meetings, like you discussed at the firehouse, parks, city halls, at the community center. The city might want to begin with inviting community educators like people from UCI, Stephen J. Davis, Michael Prather at Chapman, Hesham El-Skari, at Jerry Lips at Fullerton. These are men that specialize in climate science. I would also recommend that we talk to people that deal with psychology, economics, all these things come into play when you start looking at this problem. The City Council could choose to put these events on and issue invitations. That would be the best, but it may give the impression that the city is endorsing more than just a public forum. So Citizens Climate Lobby, a group I'm part of, again, is a group that is well-versed on the subject. We just returned from a meeting in Washington. We had 500-plus meetings with members of Congress and their staff. There were 900 of us there, 14 from Orange County. So we're well-versed on what's going on in Washington today and the options being discussed. There are other ways we could go. The city, CCL could take the lead on the issue. The city could co-sponsor, or maybe the city could even simply make venues available for us for some kind of an initial round and publicize them. Again, I thank you. I'll just leave this here.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm John Heffernan. I'm a former mayor from the old City Hall, and thank you for your service. A lot of knowledge there. Question is going to be how you're going to pay for it. And I've always been a proponent of a nasty topic, pier fees. And you were kind enough to raise them a couple years ago, and the new council dropped them. Dropped them both in rate, dropped them both in the footprint. And now the rest, I'm a Port Street guy, so the rest of us are going to be called to pay for all this harbor improvement when exactly pier fees would be put in the Tidelands Fund and could be used for this. That's a lot of dough extrapolated over time that you just gave back to the 800 or so private pier owners. Compounding that, I just got notice this week that Balboa Yacht Club, which is Cal Rec fees, gone up 15%, which is compounded because since February of 14, they've gone up 27%. So as you guys have reduced fees, the people on the other side, and I've been a boater, had a boat here for 38 years, are paying more. And now you're being called upon to pay for something that's benefiting the harbor. I think it's time to kind of throw on some reality glasses and make the private pier guys pay their fair share. There were smart guys who set this thing up to begin with, and you guys rolled it back, and now the rest of us are going to be called upon to pay for these seawalls that are $100 million project, and the pier guys are getting more money all the time and paying less to the Tidelands pool, and that's what's supposed to be paid for. On bad topic, but it's a fair topic that they pay more. They pay their fair share because this is a public asset. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Mayor, and council members, staff. Kathy Frazier from Island Avenue on the peninsula. I know that you're here discussing seawalls for Balboa Island, but I would like you to consider fixing our seawall between Island and Lindo that's non-existent. Years ago, when the seawall was corrected, 3 owners of houses on Edgewater got their way and did not have the seawall added because it impacted their view. These are the same 3 owners who have taken City Beach and put grass and sprinklers and trees and landscaping, which clearly tells the public it is not a public beach. As a result of their work with the staff to not get the seawall, when we have floods, Island Avenue floods, and we end up with water damaging cars, coming over the street into yards, and hopefully if El Nino comes, not into houses. But I would like you to consider an option E, which is to complete the missing seawall between Island Avenue and Lindo at Edgewater. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. My name is Craig Smith. I'm also on Island Avenue. I wanted to address the same issue raised by Ms. Frazier. There is a gap in the seawall between Edgewater, or along Edgewater between Island Avenue and Lindo. My notes, which I pass out to you, there has some photographs. Water has overtopped that area where there's no cap on the seawall, beginning in 2005, 2008, 2010, every couple of years. And it floods then on Island Avenue and Lido, Buena Vista, or Edgewater, whatever name you wish to use for that area. We made comparative measurements of the seawall heights several days ago at the time of high tide, and those measurements are also attached in figure 3. You will see that the lowest area is that area, what we call the Edgewater breach, between Lindo Island and Island Avenue. There, given a projection of the water level at the high tide for this coming year, which happens to be on Thanksgiving, the water will be at within 5 inches of the top of that area. So any kind of storm surge or other conditions are going to cause overtopping there, as has happened numerous times, as you can see from the photographs that I passed out. So this is about 140 feet of seawall that needs capping, and as on behalf of the residents of that area, we would respectfully request that the council consider a high priority action for this very limited area. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Is that seawall private or public that he's referring to?
If I know the location, I think that area is public. It's the outside right-of-way of Edgewater Drive right there in front of Bay Island.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, I'm Don Abrams. I live on the Grand Canal on the island, and I own 2 houses on the Grand Canal. I appreciate all the time and energy that's gone into this project, and my concern with any plan that you're discussing is the timing. I think Councilperson Duffield hit the nail on the head. The timing is really now. If we have a big El Nino, the 80-foot walls in front of my house are likely to have serious damage or implode. And the one thing you could do that would, on an emergency basis, which would make a huge difference, is dredging the Grand Canal. Since you've been on the council, Mayor Selich, I've raised this issue numerous times, and I know progress is being made with eelgrass mitigation, but the El Nino that we're talking about is this fall, and in order to be effective, the dredging should be starting now. So that's the one thing I would urge you to try to do, is to get a permit for an emergency dredging plan for the Grand Canal that will get us through the next 6 months to a few years while all these plans and permits are done. 2 other comments. 2 things I think won't work is a special assessment for island residents. As you pointed out, Mayor Selich, everyone uses those boardwalks. If the boardwalk was going to be deeded to the individual residents, that might be different, but I'm sure it's not going to be, so I don't think that would be fair. The other plan that I think won't work is the one to get 93 easements from the Grand Canal residents. That's just not practical. But my main import is to the emergency nature of this to get dredging done. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Mayor Selich, council members, I'm Jim Dastur, and I want to take a couple of minutes talking in my capacity as chair of the Balboa Island Improvement Association Committee on Seawalls, and then a couple of minutes just my personal observations. I think we are headed in the right direction. As far as the BIIA committee is concerned, when we looked at these 4 options, we decided that it is not our responsibility to select any options and tell the council which options to go with. We just laid out about a year ago when I came before the council, and we laid out 4 parameters that we are looking at. And as long as those 4 parameters are fulfilled, we are happy. Number 1, that City accepts the responsibility for the structural integrity of the walls now and in the foreseeable future. The city accepts the responsibility for keeping the island from flooding now and in the immediate future. That the city respects the culture of Balboa Island, along with the use of the beaches by the public, as well as the views of homeowners, etc. That in any solution that's proposed, that those things are taken into account. And fourth, that the city pays for whatever the city chooses to do with the walls. And it seems like you're headed, Mr. Mayor, in the right direction. But again, we as the committee are not going to say this is what we like or this is what you ought to do or not. Now, speaking on my own behalf here, I had a couple of observations. Like you mentioned, there's nothing really to select on basis of cost because, as you said, when you're looking at 25% contingency on items, and the four options end up being within 10% of each other, you can make any of these come out cheaper by just playing with the rate of interest or inflation or whatever else you want to do. So eventually, for the long term, the solution really that one looks for, and which is what I think we're all headed towards, is incremental, where we basically don't make any decisions that do not need to be made right away, because the parameters are uncertain in terms of whether by 2100, whether we are going to have a 2-foot rise or a 4-foot rise, or how fast or whatnot. So again, I think I'm happy with the direction that you're going. But one word of caution, that is, this El Nino is coming, and we want to be sure that our island is safe. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of council members that want to comment. Councilmember Muldoon, did you want to say something now or after public comment? Okay. Councilmember Petros?
Yeah, I just had a real quick question on the notion of the timing and the expediency of dredging Grand Canal. Is our recent Coastal Commission approval of our eelgrass mitigation plan ripe enough for us now to use that and go out and start dredging tomorrow? Where are we in that approval to be able to go out there and start moving sand around?
Well, let me answer that, and the staff can correct me if I answer it wrong. Because I've discussed this with the staff. The permit, we expect to have the permit in hand by September.
Okay.
It's an annual permit that has limitations on acreage and cubic yards, and if you don't use them by the end of the year, you lose them. The intent was to provide a method for residential pier owners to be able to dredge under their docks. I doubt that enough residential pier owners are going to get their applications together, their finances together, whatever, to be able to use that quantity up before the end of the year. So whatever the difference is, that amount of material or area will be immediately available to us to use on the Grand Canal between September and the end of the year. We don't know what it is yet because we don't know what the residential demand is. And of course, there would always be the option to put the residential demand off till after the first of the year if we felt it was critical to deal with El Nino before the end of the year.
Well, Mr. Mayor,
it's a long answer to your question.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I don't want to hold up the public that has taken the time to come out and visit with us, but I am very much intrigued by and would support action on that Grand Canal dredging as a priority while we consider a hybrid of C&D. So if whatever process needs to occur after this study session to ripen that action now, I think we can do that and then start to do that depending upon what we hear from the remainder of the public. And sir, I'm so sorry for taking your time.
Okay. Now, did I say that correctly? Anything I said wrong there?
I think you've got it right. Chris, did you want to comment on that? That it's a little tricky and we're new in this brand new process, but I think we've got the framework, what you said. And if the facts are right, any comments you have on that, Chris?
Just don't confuse us with the details now.
No details, just yes? I'm getting a nod, yes.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
All right, my name's Ron Corradini. I live on Balboa Island. I live on South Bayfront. And I apologize. I've been out of town for over a month, so I may be out of step with what's going on. But I saw signs on the island that showed the low mark and the high mark of 9.5 and 10.0 as the place where the seawall would go. Tonight, I think I heard lower than that. Am I correct?
You're correct.
At 9.0?
Correct.
9.0 for the south side, 8.5
Okay.
for the north side.
Good, thank you. I'm in favor of that. I would like to say to the gentleman who spoke earlier about the people who have docks that should be paying a fair share. On Balboa Island, it's about 1 in every 4 houses that have a pier in front of them. So there'd be 3/4 of the people on Balboa Island that are not part of that scenario. And then if you take a little time to spend some time on Balboa Island and talk to the people who walk by on the boardwalk, very few of them are residents of Balboa Island. Most of them come from elsewhere, and many of them come from Newport Beach, other locations in Newport Beach. So I think that the entire city should be paying for the seawall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sue Savory, and I too would like to thank the staff and the City Council for all the work that's been done on this. I'm fairly new to it, but I just was concerned because it appeared to me that I was looking at the first option as the option that should be eventually the alternative, because if we're looking at a wall that was built 85 years ago and the life of that wall was 100 years, then it's time to do the infrastructure change. I then look at the rest of it and say it's an issue of how high or whatever. That decision can be made. I live on Balboa Island. I enjoy it just as much as anyone does here. But the reality is the tides are rising. Even conservative estimates have it 3 to 11 inches by 2013. That means that we are making a decision now not to do the infrastructure improvement, and that would be the equivalent of saying we don't need to fix this bridge, which ideally would only have 15 more years to live. It appears in many ways to be the easiest of all the manners of construction, and so I really would like it if staff would take a look at what government options there are. Our government is paying a fortune for berms, for all kinds of work done after floods occur. This is an opportunity to find a way to prevent the flood from occurring. And so what options exist in infrastructure support to have the organizations that exist to help cities work with us? I just didn't see it here, and I just wonder if that doesn't need to be addressed as well. What can we do to go after resources in the state and in the government as well? I thank you again for all the hard work on this. We appreciate it very much.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, council members, I'm Brian Ozonian, property owner for 40 years on Balboa Island. I have a degree in heavy construction. I work for Fluor Engineers and Constructors. I was a party to the Alaskan Pipeline project in design and construction, specifically in Valdez, Alaska, where the tankers came in. I have quite a bit of experience and I'm very familiar with the great slides that were presented today, which I think is excellent. One thing I've been a private contractor for 45 years. One thing I've learned is you don't put good money after bad. What I see on the island is a lot of unforeseen subsurface conditions. What I saw on Bay Isle was a first-class job. We have a first-class city hall. I don't think we should go on the cheap with the island seawall. I agree with the lower walls, but build the structure to accommodate higher if we need it. But it's really a matter of looking ahead. 20 years, too short, much too short. We have essentially junk all around that island. It needs to be upgraded to a first-class infrastructure. We have multiple counties that enjoy Balboa Island as a tourist spectacle. It's a Disneyland in the water. People come from all over the world and want to come here. One suggestion is GoFundMe by the city. Set up a GoFundMe and, quote, save Balboa Island, because you will reach the heart of people that have enjoyed it for generations. They will give if there's a good cause. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. I appreciate the direction of staff to go and find some other values, other ways to go about funding. But I want to emphasize, don't put good money after bad. Gee, there's 3 roofs. I think we can put another 4th one and it looks really good. The tieback situation is terrible. I've put them in. I've put them in under the most adverse conditions. The problem we have is it's going into sand, which won't help. Everything's sand. So tiebacks into sand, very problematic. But soldier piles around the perimeter like Bay Isle did with a cap on top of it, that's a first-class job. Watched it, loved it, and thought, someone's really doing it right. I don't think we should step down less for Balboa Island. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Lee Pearl, and I live on Balboa Island. And I'm one of the Seawall committee members. And I wanted to thank the council and the staff for their hard work on the project. But there's one lesson learned that I think is really important. And about 45 years ago, somebody should have said we had 45-year-old seawalls on Balboa Island, and we should have started reserving money at that time. And we wouldn't have our finance director in a bind now trying to figure out how to pay for something. You would just making a decision that will appropriate the money out of our reserves for infrastructure, and it wouldn't be controversial. And it's really, the lesson learned is that we really need to look at our Tidelands Fund and all of the infrastructure and capital improvements that need to be made over the next 50 years and make sure that we set money aside for those projects so it takes all the controversy out of a decision like this and you have the money to do what you need to do. Because I believe the proper thing to do is to rebuild the walls. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Jeff Herdman, Balboa Island. I just have a request. Bob, the markers that you put up all over the island indicating the various heights, I'm wondering if they can be removed now. They're seriously vandalized. Some people have come and sawed off the tops of them. They've been written all over, and I think it's time they be removed. I think they've been up for at least 6 months, so I think everyone gets the idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other speakers? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to council. Councilmember Muldoon, did you still want to speak?
Yeah, just briefly. I totally agree with Mr. Petros. Had the same thoughts. Maybe wise for us. I would support trying to get emergency or expedited dredging of that area. Just want to comment that Balboa Island has a public easement around it, which means it's not necessarily Tidelands. It's okay to use other funds to pay for it. Everyone uses it the same way people use sidewalks and the port streets. It's a very important part of the city, and I don't think it's okay to fleece the harbor residents or users, excuse me, to pay for Balboa Island, considering how many people use it. So that's my thoughts on it. I like Mayor Selch's plan, incremental and sort of piecemeal, because I don't think projects this big necessarily have to be done overnight. Thank you.
Councilmember Petros.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. One, I would like to also compliment staff on work well done. I sit on the Tidelands Management Committee, and Bob, really hats off to you. This is yeoman's work here. And Mayor Selich, you really have moved this along, and I congratulate you for that. And as I sat and listened to your 10-point plan, I was very impressed how deliberate you were in each element of it. So I would support that type of an approach in this, for a short-term or mid-range solution. I, though, thought that Mr. Duffy had some very interesting ideas on some alternative methods of installation. So I think that we should pursue investigating possible soldier pile tieback as an alternative measure. Thank you, Duffy, for that. But there are two important things to me. We just got the eelgrass mitigation approved by the commission. The permit isn't in. This is a perfect opportunity to start using and exploiting that win at the Coastal Commission. And this is the example. This is the example. So I would like to see how, Mr. Mayor, we could continue to direct staff to follow up with your proposal amended by Mr. Duffy, but bifurcate the two and get the dredging of Grand Canal started as soon as the ink's dry on that permit. Secondly, I too believe, I don't want to see anybody fleeced, so we're not going to do that, but I also agree that there's a public easement around Balboa Island, and the users, hey, I live in the Heights, I walk on the island, I like it, and so does the rest of Newport Beach, and you're right, so does the world. So I do think that it's something that is the responsibility of the city to improve, maintain, and manage. And I think what I'm hearing from the mayor is a host of ways, Dan, for us to look at funding that would show the joint responsibility of all the users of the island and all the residents of Newport Beach that enjoy it.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Dixon.
Thank you. And thank you, staff, Bob and Dave. You've done a fantastic job. A couple questions. Speaking of the Coastal Commission, what about going forward? I mean, they've announced their plan or set forward their plan on sea level rise. Are we going to be set with some obstacles presented by the Coastal Commission in terms of any planning or permitting in addition to what we've already been granted going forward? Do you anticipate, have you built that into the plan process?
We've talked about it. We need to discuss what level of permitting would be required. As we alluded to, sometimes you can do maintenance under the Coastal Act, and we can maybe look at that. There's also emergency measures. I do think there's hope in the new eelgrass plan, and Chris and I had an extensive discussion. Actually, on that note, I'd let you know that Chris is working with Anchor already now in the planning of dredging the Grand Canal. We sat in a meeting the other day, and they've already started moving that direction in hopes to what Mr. Petros said, getting ahead so when we get to September, we maybe can do something here. So that might take its own permit on that level, but we've already got a means to that. We'll have to look at the other functions of how we repair or cap the walls and see if coastal permits are necessary or not.
Well, I guess I'm just anticipating we're going to run into some headwinds there. I just want to be sure we factor that in. Also, some speakers mentioned the peninsula, Edgewater. Have you factored that in, and from a cost standpoint?
We haven't factored that in. I've heard that before, and I've seen some photos of flooding. There are isolated areas around the city, and we have done seawall repairs. Some of it's public walls, some of it's private walls, particularly around Newport Island, things like that. So we'll need to look at that. Maybe that's an item for the Tidelands Committee. When we look at the next CIP for next year, we put money in available and have to kind of scope that out and see what wall needs to be replaced there.
Well, I guess that would be my recommendation if we could include wherever it is needed on the peninsula. And I guess that was it on my questions. All right. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Curry.
Well, first of all, let me congratulate the staff for outstanding research and very thoughtful presentation about the issue and the potential solution and the substance of what we're dealing with today. I also want to thank and congratulate the mayor for really being thoughtful and working with the community and coming up with an idea that takes the best parts and puts them together in a strategy that we can move forward with. I think everybody here is impressed by or takes note of the cost of a program of this size. It's of major magnitude. And one way or the other, all of the citizens of the city are going to end up participating in the financing of this, just as they participated in the financing of dredging a couple of years ago. Former Mayor Heffernan made reference to the fact that we had cut Tidelands fees at a time when we now find that we really need these Tidelands fees to form the basis for moving forward. This project is far beyond the ability of the Tidelands Fund to pay for it by itself. So under any circumstances, we're going to see the general fund subsidizing this project. Reference was made to Bay Island. Bay Island was 100% financed by assessments by the property owners themselves. That's how they were able to do it at that great quality standard. I think all of us would like to avoid assessments on Balboa Island, but that means we have to maintain our revenues in such a way as to pay for this. Now, the cut to residential pier owners is for 600 of the 800 of them is going to be about $18 a year. So I really would hardly characterize that as fleecing those dock owners. The more serious cut, $750,000 a year to the budget, comes from the mooring holders. And there, 60% of the benefit of that cut is going to people who don't even live in our city, while we, the taxpayers of the city, are left to pay for the very serious needs that we have. That's why cutting revenues the way we've done it may not have been the most thoughtful thing as we look at projects of this magnitude. But Mayor Selich, I congratulate you. I think we need to move forward quickly and address these issues, and I certainly, of course, support dredging on the Grand Canal.
Thank you. Councilmember Piotr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I too thank you very much with your approach. I like your bare budget approach, especially since we don't have a lot of budget there. I appreciate you working with Councilman Duffy and coming up with some creative engineering alternatives on this. I do agree with Councilwoman Dixon that we need some urgency, and particularly, like Mr. Petros said, we need to get that Grand Canal done like this winter before we hit those El Ninos. At least get that dredging done and protect those walls. And I look forward to the engineering study to determine exactly how bad those walls are on the west side so we can make future decisions. And I'd like to recommend that the Finance Committee come back to us with a proposal on how to fund this, both in the near term for the $14 to $17 million we're going to spend, but also in that 20-year term of how we're going to save money to be able to make that $60 to $70 million payment when we have to replace all the walls. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, staff, do you think you have enough direction now for that?
I believe we do.
Okay. I want to thank everyone for coming and expressing your opinions today. Remember, July 25th, Firehouse out on Balboa Island. We'll have another conversation on this. Again, thank you for coming. Okay, Madam Clerk.
Public comments. The city provides a yellow sign-in card to assist in the preparation of the minutes. The completion of the card is not required in order to address the city council. If the optional sign-in card has been completed, it should be placed in the box provided at the podium. The City Council of Newport Beach welcomes and encourages community participation. Public comments are invited on items listed on the agenda and non-agenda items. Speakers must limit comments to 3 minutes per person to allow everyone to speak. Written comments are encouraged as well. The City Council has the discretion to extend or shorten the time limit on agenda or non-agenda items.
Okay, any public comments? Please come forward. Okay, seeing none. Mr. City Attorney, do you have any announcements to go into closed session?
Yes, I do. The City Council will adjourn to closed session to discuss agenda items 4A through C, including meeting with City Manager Dave Kiff and John Holtzman to discuss labor negotiations between the city and all represented employees, meeting with legal counsel to discuss 2 matters where the city may initiate litigation, and the case of Pacific Shores and Newport Coast Recovery versus the City of Newport Beach.
Okay, we're adjourned to closed session.